Hello and welcome to a very special edition of the Tigers Down Under. I'm your host as always, Alex, and with me today I have Brad
Hello there.
and also Dan. How are you, Dan?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, good. It's of course our 100th episode of the Tigers Down Under, which is pretty remarkable. I didn't think initially we'd get to this stage, but it's yeah, look, a great achievement and a credit to all of us that we've kind of stuck at it and kind of grown a bit of an audience and people clearly like listening to what we've got to say. So um, that being said, I guess we'll crack on and talk about a pretty fantastic win over the weekend against Stoke, which was a come from behind win, which is uh, on some level surprising against a side in Stoke's position, but then you look at how he played against Barnsley, and perhaps this sort of performance was to be expected. But I'll start with you, Brad. What did you make of the performance and the tenacity of the side to come back from a goal down?
Look, I suppose we're getting used to sort of being a bit nervy and letting in an early goal or finding some way to remind ourselves that we've actually got to be alive. But probably the best thing about the game, which was contrary, totally the opposite to what we were talking about last week, was we actually had plenty of shots. And I realise not all of them were on target, but it shows at least we're in that final third a lot. Whereas I think the week before we were talking about we may have only even had one shot on for the whole second half. So, a bit loose at times, probably more tenacity, probably more drive, but at least we were actually getting right into that point where we're making opportunities.
Dan, what was your take on it? I mean, as Brad said, it felt a bit at times as if Stoke had a red card because they were sitting behind the ball a lot trying to defend the lead. And then it just took a couple of minutes in that second half for Bowen to break them down.
Yeah, look, I think that the goal that we conceded just, it's sort of that thing that I was talking about a couple of weeks ago. There was a point where we seemed pretty solid and we seemed like we weren't going to concede. But I think over the last month or so, for whatever reason, I feel like we always have a goal to concede in every game we play for whatever reason. And that goal, that was just poor marking. It was just a moment where Elder wasn't with his man and didn't contest that ball. And you can't let a ball go uncontested on the edge of the 6 yard box. Like 9 times out of 10, that's going to result in a goal. So that was disappointing. But I think overall, in terms of how you look at how we approach the game, and Brad touched on it, that how attacking we were and the intent with which we played, it sort of felt like even though we were one down, it was a matter of if we scored, not when we scored.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess credit to Bowen getting his double for the game again. It seems like the hat trick will always elude him. He still hasn't managed to score a hat trick, but he now moves a goal behind Mitrovic in the Golden Boot. Brad, do you think he's a legitimate chance at winning the Golden Boot this season?
Look, I actually think he is. The key's obviously going to be how many times we're in the game to score goals. So on the weekend, okay, let's not take anything away from the fact that Stoke are down the bottom for a reason, but we genuinely wanted to score goals. And there's been times this year where, just going along the lines with what Dan said, we just look like we're happy to knock a baller out. But the best we've played this year is when Bowen and Grosicki and so on are getting right in behind. And I honestly think he can, but we've got to make sure, obviously, that we're in enough games where he's going to get those chances to score. It's not top of the table where you're guaranteed to score 2 or 3 every week. We're going to have to grind out a lot of 1-0s or 2-1s to get the job done. But I think he is. Everyone wants him. They know how good a talent he actually is. He's not just scoring goals. He's doing it regularly. I know the hat trick has eluded him, but certainly the braces haven't. And he doesn't look sort of satisfied until he's scoring bags of them.
Yeah, and to do a bit of a minor name drop, when I was talking to Elder the other week, he did make the comment that at the moment the team is sort of just looking for Bowen, and they give him the ball to see what he can do with it, and it's pretty good things at the moment. It's pretty remarkable as well to think he's only 22, and another quite young player who's only 20, Lopez, has looked fantastic in the middle of the pitch. Dan, how important is it with these younger players to sort of get that consistency in their games, I guess, because I guess it's a hallmark sometimes of younger players that they can have a bit of streaky form, but when they're at the top of their game, these younger guys are really sort of leading the way.
Yeah, I think like what you often see with the like young talented guys, especially you think of a guy like Bowler, these guys that are at bigger clubs who are undoubtedly talented, but spend the majority of their time playing against other 20-year-olds, and they don't really get that chance to build, like really develop into professional footballers at a real senior level. And I think that we're sort of at that stage as a club where we can attract those quality players to come and sign for us and offer them the chance to play at a good competitive level and develop, really well. And some of these guys will hopefully, like you look at, Device and Burke, who we brought in,
Yep.
who started off, a bit shaky, but grew into it and grew into the competition as they began to understand more about, the English game and the championship as a competition and the club and the style of football. And now that's, they're a lock for that centre back pairing to start if they're both fit. So I think guys like Lopez, Bowler I mentioned, but whether
George Long as
we're
well,
going to pay
really.
out George Long, whether we're going to pay the $5 million that they want for Bowler to sign him on a permanent is another story. But those sort of guys, they really do need. They need that regular football, and they need to be like Dan Batty as well. They need to be allowed to make some mistakes.
Yeah.
As soon you can't if they have a bad game, you sort of need to trust them that they can bounce back. If it sort of goes on, then sure, pull them out and sit them down and have a chat and and start again. But I think that consistency. I mean, consistently, you can only build consistency if you're playing consistently, I guess is the main point here.
Absolutely. Well, it was a fantastic result against Stoke, and we'll move on to sort of talk about, I guess, the past 5 years for the club, because it was back in February 2016 that the podcast first started. I think it was myself and Mitch on the first episode. Logan may have been on as well. And in that time, in that 100 episodes, we've had a promotion, we've had a relegation, we've had 6 managers, we've gone from a squad that had European players like Alan McGregor, Andy Robertson, Curtis Davies, Yelovich, Hernandez, all sort of have come through the squad. We've now got players that we've just touched on, Bowen, Grzycki, Irvine, Long. So a lot has changed. A lot has stayed the same as well. We've still got the same owners who have been trying to sell the club for a number of years now. But it's good to see, I think it was that first episode or one of the first episodes where you were talking about the red card protest against the, at the time, new membership scheme, and that's now been readjusted, so we have concessions back for match-going City supporters. We've got our name back on the crest, which was a huge bugbear for many years for supporters. So there's been some really positive changes and growth within the club, and I mean, you look back at our last relegation and the doom and gloom around the club and the fears that we were going to follow Sunderland down into League One. The fact that we've been able to turn it around, re-energise the squad, and legitimately be challenging for promotion is pretty remarkable. So it's been a pretty full-on 5 years, and we reached out to other members of the Tigers Down Under supporters group Facebook page and on Twitter to see if they have any questions. And I guess the best place to start is with this question from Chris Gardam, who asked, do we think we'll be back in the Premier League in the next 5 years? Will the club still be up for sale? Will the owners still be here? Brad, do you reckon we'll be back up in the Premier League within the next 5 years?
Can I tackle the second one first?
Yeah, sure.
I think if the club's up for sale in 5 years' time, well, we're all stuffed. I think we can genuinely get back in there, but I think we all know that that's linked to investment and getting ourselves, cherry ripe pre-season, and that's actually having more than a skeleton squad, having a manager that wants to stay. They're the two real key drivers. If you look back to the last Premier League campaign, we all know Brucey wasn't the most technical of managers, or tactical of managers, I should say, but he put a squad together early. They played for each other. They did everything a squad should. And so the issue you've got now is that we've got a squad that generally doesn't get prepared till a week or so before the first game of the season, runs pretty thin for the first third of the season, and doesn't get a lot of relief in January. So that's our formula. That's what we've got to change, and we'll be able to do it.
What about you, Dan? How do you see our chances of a potential promotion?
I
Sale.
guess sale. Yeah, promotion. I think, in all honesty, I think uh, based on the last couple of years and where we are at the moment and what I expect to happen in the next couple of years, I think this season is our best chance at promotion. I suspect at the end of this season that or like leading into next season, we're gonna see some big offers for Jared Bowen, and it's going to be hard to keep him beyond this year. I think there's some of those other players that are nearing the end of their contracts who are probably on pretty substantial wages who we are probably going to be looking to trim. Um, I honestly think this year's sort of the year, and at the moment we're in a pretty good position where we can, if we can continue the way we're going, maybe get a little bit more consistent. Then we're going to be right there at the pointy end of the season to fight for a spot in the playoffs.
As a subset to that question, do you think that a promotion would make a sale more or less likely? Do you think the Allens would be more inclined to stick around with the funds that come with being a Premier League club, or do you reckon they would sort of capitalise on that and see that as a good time to cut the ties?
That's an interesting question. I can sort of see both sides. I'd hope that that the promotion to the Premier League would just make the club that much more of a exciting, valuable proposition for a potential owner, that someone else would come in. Perhaps the money that the Allens, the club gets, can hopefully affect that asking price, because it's been pretty high really for a club of our size. And I think some of that was that the Allens obviously just want to recoup the money that they've put into the club, which is sure, completely understandable. But I don't know. It's a tough one. I guess it would be nice just to see this little side story resolved sooner rather than later.
Our other question came from Connor Banham, who was asking us who do we think the five best players have been of the last 100 episodes, or I'll call it the last 5 seasons. Making that a little bit more concise and feeding into one of the following questions. Brad, I'll start with you. Who has been your favourite player of the last 5 years?
It was only just before we went on that I actually started thinking about this. I think probably one of my favourites through the whole thing was the fact that, and not necessarily because he was the best over that time, but the fact that the club was big enough that Michael Dawson thought he'd come and join us. Yep. I remember at the time thinking, wow, this guy's from Spurs, basically someone who was unattainable. But I still remember that day thinking, wow, that's a decent recruit. And he did, obviously, really serviceable and did a great job for us. But I just remember being amazed that a guy like that would come and join us.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, actually, because that's exactly the same reaction I had. Because obviously we had Andy Dawson as a great servant of the club, but Michael Dawson was always sort of, the quote-unquote more skillful player, sort of out of reach at a much higher level club. So for him to then kind of almost finish his career with us was a pretty remarkable one. Dan, what about you? Who was your favourite player, or who are some honourable mentions?
I think for a similar reason, or in terms of like the sort of stature and where they were, I think Hernandez has always been one that I always thought was a really good signing. Just unfortunately didn't seem to quite cut it at Premier League level, but was crucial to us, earning promotion. Scoring 22 goals or something in that season in the championship. For a club of our size to attract a Uruguayan international, to the club is quite an achievement, and to pull him away from the Serie A, I thought was quite a good signing. I thought realistically for the money that we paid, I thought we got good value out of him, and he was, just a bit unfortunate in the Premier League spells that he had, but I thought overall he was a good quality player who had a good eye for goal.
And I can't go past this question without I'll chuck in. It probably is my favourite, and he's still at the club. Is got to be Jared Bowen. Sort of not quite a homegrown player, not from Hull itself, but a youth product to come into the side and have the impact he's had is just phenomenal. And then from just a joyful, infectious sort of watch is Andy Robertson as well. Has got to get a mention in there. It was sort of cut from the same cloth in the sense that he was a really young player coming into the side, a really sort of rough gem, and that we sort of refined and turned into this quality player who's now remarkably gone on to win the Champions League, which is quite incredible. I guess the other question we'll have a look at, see if you guys can think of one. It's always a really hard one to answer. What's been your favourite game of the last 5 years? I might start with you on this one, Dan.
I was thinking about this earlier. No, I wasn't really sure, but then I was thinking it's not one game, but that was it the semi-final legs of was it the FA Cup or the League Cup just after Marco Silva took over in the Premier League? Those semis against Manchester United.
Yep.
I don't know. It was a weird time. We just got a new manager, and although we lost the ties, like the semi overall, did we win the second?
We won the second
We
leg
won
2-1,
the
I think.
second
Yeah.
leg. Yeah.
I think we would
and
have
we
even
played.
gone to extra time if they got a dodgy goal at the end of the first leg, I think, which if they hadn't got that would have
Yeah, I can't remember. It was something weird like that. But yeah, I think it was probably the first time in a long time where we really had taken it to a high quality opposition and really showed, what we were capable of. And it was right after Marco Silva had started, obviously, and we'd had, I think, a couple of good results against in the cup previously. I think who did we won pretty convincing in the round before that, I think.
Was it Newcastle? Well, no, sorry, the Newcastle game I don't think was comprehensive. That was the one where I think Ebukani got sent off. Snodgrass scored right before full time, and then I think we beat them on penalties. But you're right. I think there was a pretty comprehensive
Was
win
it
in there as well.
a game against Swansea or someone like that? I think maybe, and it ended up like 3 or 4-0. I think something wild. But I don't know. It was just it's a shame that it, I guess, didn't all work out with Silva because we seemed to play a really nice start brand of football. But I don't know. That's a game that stuck in my mind as just, I guess it was a bit of a marker, and that we really weren't going to be, I guess, afraid of those top, the top 6 clubs. We really were going to take it to them at the end through the end of that season.
Yeah. How about yourself, Brad?
Mine's a little bit different. It's not probably that much of a memorable game, although it sounds it. But definitely when we beat Liverpool 2-0 with effectively, at that point was a couple of, say, Liverpudlian rejects running around, either wrong colour of town, of course, being Everton, but to have 2 goal scorers who weren't technically even our players against the night that no one gave us any chance. Liverpool really had it all to play for, and probably proved that the first time we beat them in the Premier League wasn't a fluke either. Just so happens that they smashed us many, many years ago at home. But that was more just the fact that, okay, for a game that we didn't probably dominate possession, I don't even know what the statistics would have looked like. But we were definitely not on the same class as them. But when it mattered, we scored 2 goals that they didn't. So it was just great to rub it in.
It's funny, actually, that you both picked Marco Silva games. In sort of honour of the fallen Everton manager, I guess.
Yes,
look,
there you go.
It's a really hard one to answer because there's so many different contexts you can look at it in, and I'm almost tempted to say the game that we're probably going to talk about in a little bit is our flashback game from last season against our opponents this Wednesday. Look, I'll probably say the playoff final against Sheff Wednesday, only because that's probably the last time that we really had a united team behind Steve Bruce. Players were fantastic. It was one of those games where we're so often the underdog in a game that to be such an overwhelming, not only favourite, but to play so well on the day as well. And really, we should have scored a whole lot more goals than we did. Was really sort of a great feeling that we had this amazing team behind us. And yes, it didn't necessarily go on to pan out that way, but at that moment, it all felt like it had come together, and we were going to go back up and have another great spell in the Premier League. So that's probably the one I'll pinpoint. I mean, obviously the Derby leg in the semi-final where we won 3-0 was also pretty fantastic in that campaign. But talking briefly there about that Leeds game, we'll talk about in detail a little bit more later the game from last season. But we do have Leeds this Wednesday morning in a pretty huge clash. Sort of a similar story to last season, although I think we're in slightly better form than last season. But Leeds on a huge winning run. They've won all 5 of their last 5 games. I think they've only conceded 10 for the whole season, so it's the best defensive record in Europe or something like that. But they haven't played against Jared Bowen yet this season, so that could all change. I'll start with you, Dan, on this one. What are you sort of expecting with this one? Is it a game where we've got nothing to lose, let's just go at them, or is it a game where we can really take some confidence from last season and really go there thinking we can win it?
Look, I think we've shown over the course of the season that we can beat anyone. We've also shown that we're almost just as likely to not really turn up at all, which is a bit of a shame. And so, especially over the last few weeks, it's really hard to read any form and decide, figure out whether the team's, feeling confident or not. So I'm really not too sure about this weekend. I think obviously, I believe in the players and the squad that we have, and I believe that they can go there and do a job. I'm really unsure about whether they actually will.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's an interesting one, and I guess the real positive or the real confidence we can take is the fact that we at least tend to turn up against the bigger sides. I think West Brom's probably the only team where we've really sort of struggled, and even then we only lost 1-0, and they're sort of dismantling sides left and right. Brad, do you sort of look back at, I guess, the game against Preston, and you sort of touched on, against Barnsley, against Stoke, we probably got a bit of jitters because we were the favourite going into it, but against your Prestons, your Forests, your other top 6 sides, with Fulham, we've actually looked quite good. Do you sort of take that confidence into this game?
Yeah, look, I do, and probably the only thing, and this has got nothing to do with form or even on paper, but if you look at where Leeds sit, I think it's 6 on the trot now or something like that.
Yeah.
Barely conceded a goal, like you said at the start. They're just on fire. It's going to come to an end, and who better to do it than us, because we're consistently good at turning them over. So probably the only thing.
It's almost like that Liverpool form, like you were saying before. We
pretty
tend
much
to do well against Liverpool. We do well against Leeds.
Don't have a chance. It might be just the way some of the plans come into place. You come in with a mindset that, okay, we're going to have to work harder to be competitive or whatever it may be. But look, this week you can only go by the bookmakers, and I think the bookmakers have got us at sort of $8 or something crazy.
Yeah,
so
crazy.
I think it's worth a few lazy dollars, and we'll have a nice Christmas like we've had before, turning Leeds over.
Absolutely, always makes Christmas a little bit merrier. I guess the big question marks out of the game against Stoke would be perhaps a change up top. Eves looked, he looked about as good as he has, which is to say, I mean, he's been competitive. He's made a contest of it. He's sort of helped bring Bowen into the game on occasions, but the question then becomes whether we play a more fluid front 3 as we have at times. You bring Bowler off the bench, start Bowen up top perhaps. Dan, do you see any need for a change? I guess conscious of the fact it's a midweek game. We showed last week we had a bit of fatigue when we had to play a couple of games in a short space of time. Are there any changes that you would probably think to make to the side?
I guess it would. I don't know. I guess it's all that depends on how everyone's pulled up. I think there probably will be probably that change. That's probably that change you mentioned. Maybe a change in the middle of the park to because those 3 boys in the middle cover a lot of ground and do a lot of work. So if there's anyone to give them some fresh legs, I guess like Honeyman might come back in or something, just to freshen up. Because as you said, we've got Wednesday, then we've got on Saturday morning again.
Yeah, which I didn't even realise we were
so
playing Saturday morning, so it's a very short turnaround.
Yeah, so I think just with the 3 games in a week, I'd expect there'd probably be some minor shuffling, minor changes, but I think for the most part, it'll probably really be it'll be whoever needs it, whoever looks like they're looks like they need a bit of a break. But I wouldn't expect too much because consistency is key, really.
Brad, what are your thoughts? Do you think it's better to sort of keep a winning team together, or make that change and give us a bit more unpredictability up top?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think probably if we go back to previous encounters against Leeds, we've always gone in with a lineup that's pretty set at the back, and then I know Nigel Adkins had a habit of throwing a red herring in up forward every now and then when you didn't expect it. But I think probably this week the hardest thing's going to be is to break down that back four, and I think the only way we're going to do it is, like Dan said, is if you've got a really fluid running front three that can pepper them from a few different angles and try and stretch them. It's certainly not going to be a day where I think you can just sort of play Tom Eaves up top and have a couple running around. I think we're going to have to really run at them.
And then just finally, a score prediction from both of you. Personally, I'm going to go with my heart on this one. I always like to go with my heart when it's Leeds. I don't really care what my brain's telling me, and I'll say that we're going to win it 2-1. I just feel like Grzycki is due a goal, so I could see a late Grzycki free kick flying into the top corner to give us the win. But how are you feeling about it, Dan?
Look, you're going with your heart. I'm for probably the first time in probably about 12 episodes. I'm gonna tip with my head. I think it'll be the same score, but it'll be the other way around. I think Leeds is gonna just knock us off. I think we'll score first and then concede 2.
And how about yourself, Brad?
I can never do it with my head. I think at this stage we're just going to say we're going to win, and I actually think Irvine's going to get on the score sheet just brilliant. For a bit of Christmas pudding. Yeah.
And look, anyone listening in, I'm going to try and make it to Cheers Bar Wednesday morning. So anyone in Sydney, feel free to come along. I'll get the game up on the screen and hopefully kick off the workday in the right way. But we'll move on, and as Dan touched on, we do have a game Saturday morning, so it's a very, very short turnaround, and it's against Charlton, who've dropped to 17th. They did start the season quite well, but they've really sort of dropped off, and they've lost 4 of their last 5. So, putting our pessimistic hats on, if we are to drop points to Leeds, if we are to lose to Leeds, I think it sort of positions itself as a really good game to sort of put the Leeds game behind us and try and rebound quite quickly with such a short turnaround. Dan, do you see it as, regardless of the Leeds result, if we are to win against Leeds, it's a good chance to keep the winning feeling going? If we drop points, it's a good chance to put it behind us and really target 3 points against a struggling Charlton side?
Yeah, I think as I keep saying again, when we play these teams that are down there at the bottom end of the table, that they're the games that we have to win. If we want to be in that playoff spot, in those playoff spots, and keeping pace with those, even maybe even optimistically starting to catch those top 2, then those are the games we have to win. I don't know what else to say. That's it. We have to win.
Do you think we'll win it, considering our form recently against those struggling sides?
I don't know. I guess it's a flip of a coin deal. The same with if we beat Leeds, we'll probably lose to Charlton, but if we lose to Leeds, we'll probably beat Charlton. I think we can win. I think we should win, and I think we will win. I can't see us dropping all 6 points in the week. I think we'll at least pick up some points this week. 3, 4, if we're really lucky, 6.
Yeah, Brad. I mean, I guess it's similar to what I was saying last week about if you flip the Preston and Barnsley results, it looks a lot better than it ended up feeling, because a loss to Preston and then a win against Barnsley 4-0 would have given us a bit more confidence, I guess, in that sense. But how do you feel about the game? Do you see it as a good chance to carry on from the Leeds game, or is it perhaps a bit concerning with the game so close together that we might have to rotate a bit more heavily?
Oh, look, I think probably the rotation's what we need. If we're going to be, thereabouts playoff time at the end of the season, it won't be just on the best 8 or 10 that we've got. It's going to be these midweek games where we can get a result. So we've seen even this flashback, talking about Robertson and Maguire. I mean, we remember when Maguire couldn't get in the team.
Yeah.
And he was certainly not an England hero back then. So without these chances for these guys to be able to shine and get the opportunity, we're not going to be getting anywhere come into the season anyway. But probably the only good thing is just taking to what Dan said. highly likely to beat Leeds because we shouldn't, and then probably get stumped by Charlton. But the good thing is that, you've still got to remember what we're there for. We're all supporters, and that Leeds game last year was like Christmas all over again, pardon the pun. But at least in this case, we've got something to look forward to on a huge level with Leeds, and I think McCann should pick the strongest team for each week, forgetting what's behind it, because you've only got this week to look at the moment.
Absolutely, and you touched on that Leeds game from last season, and that is our football flashback game of the week. In a pretty remarkable win, winning 2-0 at Elland Road when no one gave us a chance. I think Leeds had won however many games it was in a row, and we were, struggling side, just sort of starting to put a few wins together. And really, it was the first result where we sort of thought, hang on, this side does have a bit about it. We can go on a little bit of a run. We knocked off sides like Sheffield Wednesday and other sides, battered Bolton on a bit of a run after this game. But this was the game that really gave us a bit of confidence. And the other reason I absolutely love it is it was the game that broke Leeds' winning run, shattered their confidence, and they sort of stumbled and fell out of the automatic spots after that and stuffed up their big promotion chance while they had that Amazon Prime film crew there. So they kind of stuffed everything up, which was fantastic. I've still yet to watch that documentary, but I'll absolutely love it when I do. Before I get both your thoughts on it, it was looking at the lineup for this game, I was absolutely amazed. Can either of you remember who started up top for us in that one?
I can remember one of them.
Who have you got in mind?
Will Keane.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the one. Got a new one. I was amazed that he was the player that started up top for us in that one, because it's quite remarkable looking back on it. I can't remember off the top of my head, but presumably Campbell was injured for that one, because I can't imagine Keane would have started up top for any other reason. But it just underlined what a remarkable win it was.
Is that because Will Keane was playing?
Yeah, exactly right. Well, I mean, the fact that was sort of the quality of our starting 11, and with no disrespect to Will Keane, it sort of suggests that perhaps there wasn't a whole lot on the bench behind him if he was the one leading the line. But yeah, Brad, I mean, you were talking about it just before. What are your memories of this game and what it really sort of meant for our season?
I remember not getting to watch it. That was disappointing. And then when I saw the results come through, I thought, oh, you've got to be joking. Someone's having a lend. And then by the time I watched the highlights, I just remember a lot of this, especially the stuff on social media, just how good everyone was saying it was as a day out. Not just because we beat Leeds, but no one gave us a sniff. The manager was pretty much, never our saviour. The players were thrown together. It had all that sort of hallmarks of just a mishmash. And then we turn around what at that stage was probably one of the best teams in the comp on their own dig and ruin their Christmas. So, yeah, it's good.
It was fantastic, and it's always amazing seeing the response on social media from Leeds supporters afterwards, because they'll be the first to insist that they don't care about Hull, that Hull doesn't matter, that their rivals are Manchester United and Liverpool and all those big teams. But the absolute meltdowns that they go through when they lose to us, and the absolute carry-on from their supporters, is a sight to behold. So I really hope we can repeat the dose Wednesday morning. Dan, what are your memories of this one?
Look, I think it just I vaguely remember, like, we were sort of at that point we had maybe 2 wins or something for the season, and not like we weren't going great, but I think we'd sort of slowly been building a little bit of consistency in the way we played going into that game, and then it just seemed to kick it all off. And then this was very early. Was this a start, or was this like the second win in that 10 or whatever game run or something?
Right near the start of that, I suspect.
Yeah, I just remember, that's, and like, I don't know, and Bowen, like the start of, Bowen carrying us, along. I think we were sort of saying at that time we had expected more from him to that point, and he was a bit slow to get started, and then he just sort of started getting a couple of goals here and there in the couple of weeks before that, I think, and then. Yeah. And then all of a sudden he was on fire and just dragging us along by the scruff of the neck, so to speak. Very similar to sort of how it's going at the moment. Regardless of what anyone else in the club is doing, Jared Bowen is just dragging us along with him for the rides. It almost seems at times, and it was sort of it was that same sort of feeling then, that and again to knock off Leeds, who were our local rivals, that derby game, and they're at the top, as Brad mentioned, going, having perfect form, so to speak. Probably the five wins in the last five, and we were probably 4 losses and a draw or something like that.
Well, we had actually won a couple of the games before, and I'm just having a look at it now. So we'd knocked off Brentford, Swansea, and Preston before it. So we were in a little bit of form, but my memory is that those sides weren't travelling too well themselves. So it wasn't as if we were knocking off top teams.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Bowen was just starting to score. He'd scored a couple against Swansea, but that Leeds game sort of came out of nowhere because I think that would have been our first clean sheet in quite a while. Well, since that Brentford game, about 4 games before it. But it was after that we knocked off Bolton 6-0 and Sheff Wednesday 3-0. Had that great result against Villa where really we went up 2-0 and should have won the game, but I think Device got injured, which gave us a bit of a struggle. But look, it was a fantastic game that really sort of kick-started that belief that we could actually do something, and we were kind of starting to knock on the doors of the playoff places a couple of weeks later. So, yeah, just a fantastic result all around. And as you say, I mean, Bowen it's just a consistent theme each season that he's just becoming a better and better player, and the fact that he's up to 14 goals already for the season is just absolutely remarkable. And closing in on, you sort of have to start to talk about him in the same breath as someone like a Windass in terms of importance at the club, because, even just from a sheer numbers, statistics of it, he's coming close to that number of goals for the club. Yes, he's not going to score a memorable goal at Wembley as Windass did, and he's not going to have quite the same place in our folklore, but the you can't underestimate the doom and gloom around the club when we got relegated from the Premier League in that season, and the fact that everyone was so utterly convinced at our demise and our complete collapse into League Two non-league status because of our finances, because of our squad. The fact that, as you say, he's just picked us up by the scruff of the neck and taken us along for the ride. It can't be underestimated the importance that he's played the last couple of seasons. But yeah, look, thanks for joining me today, guys. It's been a fantastic episode and great to reminisce a little bit of the last 5 seasons since the podcast first began. And thank you for joining me.
Cheers, mate. Well done on the 100th episode too, Alex. You're a star.
No problem. Thanks, Brad. And thanks for joining me, Dan.
Oh, no worries. It's always a pleasure, and I guess it's nice to think that that we have, as a collective, and you have led the way, but that we have grown, to be able to have, it's a bit of a privilege really to just be able to talk and to know that people actually care what we have to say about City. So
little old us on the other side of the world, but it's great to know that people enjoy the content and people enjoy hearing a bit of discussion about City. And look, long may it continue, and hopefully we can see another promotion into the Premier League and some more achievements up there as well. But until next time, we've got a couple of great games to come for this week, I should say. And until next time, come on, City. You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
There's no turning back.